Madison Square Garden, New York City. January 23, 1984. Monday night, 11:47 p.m. The arena above is nearly empty now, just maintenance crews sweeping confetti and forgotten programs from the concrete floors. The house lights are on, revealing the harsh reality of what moments before had been a magical theater of dreams and athletic spectacle. But in the depths of this legendary venue, in a cramped locker room that smells of liniment, sweat, and decades of wrestling history, something extraordinary is happening that nobody in the wrestling world expected to see. Hulk Hogan sits alone on a wooden bench, still wearing his yellow wrestling trunks and boots, his massive frame hunched over in a posture that suggests complete emotional exhaustion. The newly won WWE Championship belt lies beside him on the bench, its gold plates catching the harsh fluorescent lighting of the underground facility. This is the moment he has dreamed about since he was a child watching wrestling on a small television in his family's modest home in Tampa, Florida. This is the culmination of years of training, sacrifice, political maneuvering, and unwavering determination to reach the pinnacle of professional wrestling. But instead of celebrating, instead of the triumph and joy that everyone would expect from the new champion, Hulk Hogan is crying. Not the tears of happiness that might be expected after achieving one's ultimate goal, but deep, wrenching sobs that seem to come from a place of profound pain and emotional release that has been building for months, perhaps even years. His massive shoulders shake with each breath, and tears stream down his tanned face, mixing with the sweat that still glistens from his championship match against the Iron Sheik just minutes before. To understand why America's newest wrestling hero is sobbing alone in a locker room during what should be the happiest moment of his professional life, you need to understand the journey that brought him to this point, a journey that has been filled with more heartbreak, betrayal, and personal sacrifice than any of his millions of fans could ever imagine. The path to this championship began not with glory, but with devastating rejection. Just 2 years earlier, Hulk Hogan was not the beloved hero that wrestling fans would come to worship. He was a villain, a heel working for Vince McMahon Sr, his Worldwide Wrestling Federation, but his character was going nowhere. The audiences weren't responding to him the way management had hoped, and whispers began circulating backstage that perhaps Terry Bollea, the man behind the Hulk Hogan character, simply didn't have what it took to be a main event performer in the wrestling business. The breaking point came during a meeting in Vince McMahon Sr.'s office, a conversation that would haunt Hulk for the next 18 months and drive him to prove himself in ways that nearly destroyed his body and his spirit. A legendary promoter who had built the WWF into a northeastern powerhouse looked across his desk at the young wrestler and delivered news that felt like a physical blow to the stomach. "Terry," McMahon Sr. said, his voice carrying the weight of decades in the wrestling business, "I don't think you're championship material. You're a good worker. Don't get me wrong, but you don't have that special something that makes people believe you're a real champion. I think it's time we started looking at other options for your career here." Those words, "you don't have that special something," would echo in Hulk's mind for months afterward. They would drive him to leave the WWF and seek opportunities elsewhere, eventually landing in the American Wrestling Association in Minnesota, where he would spend the next year and a half reinventing himself, refining his character, and developing the charisma and connection with audiences that would eventually make him the most recognizable wrestler in the world. But success in the AWA came with its own price. The travel schedule was brutal, crisscrossing the frozen Midwest in the middle of winter, performing in small arenas for audiences that sometimes numbered in the hundreds rather than thousands. The pay was inconsistent, and there were nights when Hulk wondered if he had made a terrible mistake leaving the security of the WWF for the uncertainty of life on the independent wrestling circuit. During this period, Hulk's personal life began to crumble under the pressure of his professional ambitions. His relationship with his girlfriend Linda, was strained by the constant travel and the financial instability that came with wrestling in smaller promotions. There were nights when he would call her from lonely motel rooms in towns whose names he couldn't even remember, trying to explain why he was putting them both through this struggle, why he couldn't just give up on his wrestling dreams and find a normal job that would allow them to build a stable life together. The lowest point came during a particularly difficult tour in the winter of 1982, when Hulk found himself in a motel room in Fargo, North Dakota, staring at a phone bill he couldn't afford to pay, and wondering if Vince McMahon Sr. had been right all along. Maybe he really didn't have what it took to be a champion. Maybe he was just fooling himself, chasing a dream that was never going to become reality. But something inside Hulk Hogan refused to give up. Perhaps it was the memory of his father, a construction worker who had taught him that real men don't quit when things get difficult. Perhaps it was the faces of the children in the audiences who cheered for him with genuine enthusiasm, seeing something in him that even he couldn't see in himself at the time. Whatever it was, that spark of determination kept him going through the darkest period of his career. The breakthrough came when he was discovered by Hollywood producers who were looking for a wrestler to appear in the movie Rocky III. The role was small, just a few scenes as a character called Thunderlips, but it gave Hulk national exposure and credibility that extended beyond the wrestling world. Suddenly, he was not just another wrestler grinding it out in regional promotions. He was a wrestler who had appeared in a major motion picture alongside Sylvester Stallone. This Hollywood connection caught the attention of Vince McMahon Jr., who was in the process of taking over his father's wrestling empire and had ambitious plans to expand the WWF from a regional territory into a national and eventually global entertainment phenomenon. McMahon Jr. had a vision of wrestling that went far beyond what his father had built, a vision that required larger-than-life characters who could transcend the traditional boundaries of sports entertainment. When McMahon Jr. approached Hulk about returning to what was now being called the World Wrestling Federation, the conversation was very different from the one Hulk had experienced with McMahon Sr. 2 years earlier. This time, McMahon Jr. was not questioning whether Hulk had championship material. He was betting his entire expansion strategy on the belief that Hulk Hogan could become the face of a wrestling revolution. But even with McMahon Jr.'s confidence and the promise of a main event push, Hulk's return to the WWF was fraught with anxiety, self-doubt, and the weight of enormous expectations. The wrestling business is notoriously unpredictable, filled with stories of wrestlers who seemed destined for greatness, only to flame out spectacularly when the pressure became too much to handle. There were no guarantees that audiences would accept him as a hero after years of being conditioned to see him as a villain. No promises that his Hollywood exposure would translate into wrestling credibility. The transformation from heel to hero is one of the most difficult transitions in professional wrestling, requiring not just a change in character, but a fundamental shift in how audiences perceive and relate to a performer. Some wrestlers never successfully make this transition, forever trapped in the role that first brought them recognition. Hulk knew that if he failed to connect with audiences as a good guy, there might not be another opportunity to reinvent himself. Adding to the pressure were whispers from other wrestlers, veterans of the business who questioned whether someone with his limited technical wrestling ability deserved to be positioned as the company's top star. In locker rooms across the country, conversations would stop when Hulk entered, and he could feel the skepticism and resentment from performers who felt they had paid more dues, worked harder, and demonstrated superior in-ring skills. The politics of the wrestling business are particularly brutal at the main event level, where every wrestler is competing not just for victories and championships, but for position, influence, and the favor of promoters who control careers with the stroke of a pen. Hulk understood that his rapid ascension to the top of the card had created enemies among wrestlers who felt passed over, overlooked, or unfairly relegated to supporting roles in what they considered to be their own stories. But perhaps the most difficult aspect of this period was the knowledge that his success or failure would affect not just his own career, but the careers and livelihoods of dozens of other people who were counting on him. Vince McMahon Sr.'s expansion plans required significant financial investment, and that investment was being made based largely on the belief that Hulk Hogan could draw money as the company's top attraction. If audiences rejected him, if television ratings declined, if live event attendance dropped, then everyone from office workers to referees to announcers would suffer the consequences. The pressure intensified as the date for his championship match against the Iron Sheik approached. This was not just another wrestling match. This was the moment that would determine whether Vince McMahon Sr.'s vision for the future of the wrestling business was based on sound judgment or wishful thinking. If Hulk failed to connect with the audience, if the crowd didn't react to his championship victory with the kind of explosive enthusiasm that McMahon Sr. was expecting, then years of planning and investment would be wasted. In the days leading up to the match, Hulk found himself unable to sleep, unable to eat, consumed by anxiety about living up to expectations that seemed impossibly high. He would spend hours in the gym, pushing his body to its limits, trying to exhaust himself physically so that his mind might find some peace. But even after the most grueling workouts, he would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering what would happen if he disappointed everyone who was counting on him. The match itself was everything McMahon Sr. had hoped for and more. The Madison Square Garden crowd exploded when Hulk defeated the Iron Sheik, responding with a level of enthusiasm that surprised even the most optimistic projections. The building shook with the force of 20,000 people on their feet, screaming their approval, celebrating not just a wrestling match but what felt like a cultural moment. But as soon as Hulk made it through the curtain and into the backstage area, away from the cameras and the cheering crowds, the emotional weight of everything he had been through over the past 2 years finally caught up with him. All the rejection, all the doubt, all the lonely nights in motel rooms wondering if he was wasting his life, chasing an impossible dream. All of it came flooding out in a torrent of tears that he couldn't control even if he had wanted to. These were not tears of joy, although joy was certainly part of what he was feeling. These were tears of release, tears that carried away months of accumulated stress, fear, and self-doubt. These were the tears of a man who had been told he would never be good enough, who had been forced to prove himself over and over again, and who had finally, against all odds, achieved the thing that everyone said he could never achieve. Pat Patterson, one of McMahon Jr.'s most trusted advisors, and a former wrestler himself, found Hulk in the locker room about 10 minutes after the match ended. Patterson had been in the wrestling business long enough to understand the emotional toll that comes with reaching the top, and he wasn't surprised to find the new champion in such a vulnerable state. "Terry," Patterson said softly, using Hulk's real name as a way of acknowledging that this moment was about more than just the character he played in the ring. "You did it, man. You really did it." Hulk looked up at Patterson, his eyes red from crying, and tried to find words to express what he was feeling. But how do you explain to someone else the complex mixture of relief, gratitude, vindication, and overwhelming responsibility that comes with achieving something you've wanted your entire life? "Pat," Hulk finally managed to say, his voice hoarse from the emotion, "I keep thinking about what Vince Sr. told me, about how I didn't have that special something. And now," he gestured toward the championship belt that was still lying on the bench beside him, "I don't know if I really have it even now, or if I just got lucky tonight." Patterson sat down on the bench next to the new champion and put his hand on Hulk's massive shoulder. "Listen to me, Terry. What happened out there tonight wasn't luck. That crowd didn't explode like that because they felt sorry for you or because they were told to cheer. They exploded because they saw something real in you, something authentic that connected with them on a level that goes deeper than wrestling moves or scripted promos. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Patterson sharing his own experiences of doubt and triumph in the wrestling business, helping Hulk understand that what he was feeling was not weakness but humanity, not failure, but the natural response of someone who cares deeply about their craft and their responsibility to the people who support them. By the time Patterson left the locker room, Hulk had composed himself enough to face the media obligations and celebratory meetings that awaited him. But he would never forget those moments alone on the bench, crying tears that represented the end of one chapter of his life and the beginning of another. In the years that followed, as Hulk Hogan became the most famous wrestler in the world, as he headlined WrestleMania events and appeared on television shows and movie screens around the globe, he would often think back to that night in Madison Square Garden, not to the match itself, not to the moment when his hand was raised in victory, but to those quiet moments afterward, when he sat alone in a locker room and allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had accomplished. Those tears in that locker room were the last time Hulk Hogan would ever doubt whether he belonged at the top of the wrestling world. They marked the end of Terry Bollea's journey from rejected wrestler to unlikely champion, and the beginning of Hulk Hogan's reign as the most recognizable sports entertainer on the planet. Years later, when young wrestlers would ask him for advice about handling pressure and expectations, Hulk would tell them about that night, about the importance of allowing yourself to feel emotions even when those emotions make you vulnerable, about the difference between being strong and pretending to be invulnerable. Sometimes, he would say, the most important victories are the ones that happen when nobody is watching, when you're alone with yourself and you finally realize that you're good enough, that you deserve to be where you are, and that all the doubt and fear you've been carrying around doesn't have to define you anymore. That locker room in Madison Square Garden witnessed more than just a wrestler recovering from an emotional championship match. It witnessed the birth of a legend, not because of what happened in the ring that night, but because of what happened in the quiet moments afterward, when America's newest hero learned that it was okay to be human, even when the world expects you to be superhuman.